The Allied air forces fielded massive four-engine giants capable of carrying tons of explosives deep into enemy territory, while Axis powers struggled to match this strategic bombing capability. This begins our breakdown of every important bomber that took to the skies during the World War II. The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress became the icon of American daylight precision bombing, bristling with 1350 caliber machine guns mounted in power turrets throughout its fuselage. Flying in tight box formations over Germany, these heavily armed bombers could defend themselves while delivering their payload to factories and rail yards. Though losses were devastating during unescorted missions, the Flying Fortress earned its legendary status through sheer resilience and firepower. The consolidated B-24 Liberator holds the record as the most produced bomber in history, with over 18,000 built. Featuring a longer range than the B-17, thanks to its high aspect ratio Davis wing, the Liberator served in every theatre from Europe to the Pacific. However, pilots found it more difficult to fly and less forgiving of battle damage than its more famous cousin. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress represented the pinnacle of bomber technology, featuring a pressurized cabin, remote-controlled gun turrets, and the ability to carry enormous bomb loads at high altitude. This technological marvel ultimately delivered the atomic bombs that ended the Pacific War, cementing its place as the most advanced bomber of the conflict. The consolidated B-32 Dominator arrived too late to matter, serving as a backup to the Superfortress, with only a handful seeing limited combat before the war's end. Across the Atlantic, the Avro Lancaster became the Royal Air Force's premier night bomber, featuring a cavernous bomb bay capable of carrying specialized weapons like the massive 22,000-pound Grand Slam earthquake bomb. Operating under cover of darkness, Lancasters delivered devastating tonnage to German cities and industrial targets throughout the strategic bombing campaign. The Handley Page Halifax served as the Lancaster's less glamorous sister, performing admirably in bombing, maritime patrol, and special operations roles, though it never achieved the same legendary status. The Short Stirling earned distinction as Britain's first four-engine heavy bomber, but suffered from a limited operational ceiling that left it vulnerable to flak and fighters, forcing its relegation to secondary duties by 1943. The troubled Avro Manchester, plagued by unreliable Rolls-Royce Vulture engines, proved a spectacular failure that nonetheless birthed the Lancaster when redesigned with 4 Merlin engines instead of 2 problematic Vultures. Germany's Heinkel. He-177 Greif represented the Luftwaffe's flawed attempt at strategic bombing, hamstrung by catastrophic engine fires and coupling gear failures that made it more dangerous to its own crews than to the enemy. The Focke-Wulf FW200 Condor, converted from a civilian airliner, served effectively as a long-range maritime patrol bomber and commerce raider, menacing Allied convoys in the Atlantic. The Soviet Union fielded the rare Petlyakov P-8 as its only heavy bomber, capable of striking Berlin but produced in tiny numbers. Italy's Piaggio P-108 represented an ambitious heavy bomber design with limited production and impact. Japan's Nakajima G5N Liz and 6-engine G8N Rita remained experimental curiosities, with the latter never progressing beyond prototype stage before war's end. France's Farman F2-22 heavy bomber was already obsolete when war began, swept aside during the 1940 invasion. Medium bombers formed the tactical backbone of every air force, serving as versatile workhorses on every front. The North American B-25. Mitchell achieved immortality when 16 of them launched from the carrier Hornet for the audacious Doolittle raid on Tokyo, proving America could strike back after Pearl Harbor. With its nose bristling with forward-firing machine guns, the Mitchell excelled at low-level skip bombing and strafing runs throughout the Pacific and Mediterranean theaters. The Martin B-26 Marauder earned the grim nickname Widowmaker during its early service due to its unforgiving high wing loading and hot landing speeds, though it ultimately compiled an excellent combat record once crews mastered its demanding flight characteristics. The Douglas A-20 Havoc, known as the Boston in British service, served effectively as a light-medium bomber and night intruder across multiple theatres. The sleek Douglas A-26 Invader arrived late in the war, but went on to see extensive service in Korea, representing the pinnacle of piston-engine medium bomber design. The Vickers Wellington, with its unique geodetic basket weave construction, absorbed tremendous battle damage while serving as the Royal Air Force's workhorse during the early war years. The Armstrong Whitworth Whitley operated as a night bomber before transitioning to paratroop transport and anti-submarine patrol roles. The Handley Page Hampton, nicknamed the Flying Panhandle for its narrow fuselage, suffered from cramped crew conditions but later found success as a torpedo bomber. The Bristol Blenheim represented a fast light bomber quickly outclassed by improving fighter performance, relegating it to reconnaissance duties. The de Havilland Mosquito stands as perhaps the most brilliant bomber design of the war, constructed entirely of wood to save strategic materials while relying on pure speed rather than defensive armament, serving as a precision pathfinder and high-speed strike aircraft. The Heinkel He 111, with its distinctive glazed nose, became the icon of the Blitz over Britain, though losses during daylight operations forced the Luftwaffe into night bombing. The Junkers Ju-88 earned the title Maid of All Work, serving effectively as bomber, dive bomber, night fighter, and reconnaissance platform, making it arguably the most versatile aircraft of the entire war. The Dornier Doe 17 Flying Pencil featured a pencil-thin profile but proved obsolete by mid-war. Its successor, the Dornier Doe 217, offered improved payload and performance. Japan's Mitsubishi G4M Betty possessed extraordinary range for striking distant targets, but earned the nickname Flying Lighter due to its unprotected fuel tanks that burst into flames when hit. The earlier G3M Nell served extensively in China before the Pacific War began. The Army's Mitsubishi Ki-21 Sally and Nakajima Ki-49 Helen performed adequately, but suffered from inadequate defensive armament and engines. The Mitsubishi Ki-67 Peggy represented Japan's best medium bomber design, combining speed with proper protection, though it arrived too late and in too few numbers to alter the war's outcome. The Soviet Ilyushin Il-4 conducted daring long-range raids against Berlin while also serving as a torpedo bomber. The Petlyakov P-2, often called the Soviet Mosquito, combined dive-bombing capability with fighter-like speed. The excellent Tupolev Tu-2 arrived late, but proved so effective it remained in service through the Korean War. Italy's hunchbacked Savoia Marchetti SM-79 Sparviero excelled as a torpedo bomber in the Mediterranean despite its unconventional appearance, while the older SM-81 and, disappointing, Fiat BR-20 quickly became obsolete. Dive bombers and ground attack aircraft brought precision and terror to the battlefield, screaming down from altitude to deliver their payloads with devastating accuracy. The Junkers Ju-87 Stuka became the symbol of German blitzkrieg, its inverted gull wings and fixed landing gear instantly recognizable as it plunged toward targets with Jericho trumpet sirens wailing to shatter enemy morale. While effective against undefended targets during the early campaigns, the slow and vulnerable Stuka suffered catastrophic losses when facing modern fighters, limiting it to close air support roles on the Eastern Front. The earlier Henschel H-Schiss 123 biplane represented an obsolete ground attack design pressed into service despite its antiquated configuration. The heavily armoured Henschel H-Schiss 129 evolved into a specialized tank buster, mounting a massive 75mm cannon for destroying Soviet armor. though its sluggish speed made it vulnerable to enemy fighters. The Douglas SBD Dauntless earned legendary status at the Battle of Midway when dive bomber pilots from Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet delivered the 4 bombs that sank 3 Japanese carriers in minutes, fundamentally altering the course of the Pacific War. Slow and underpowered by later standards, the Dauntless proved devastatingly effective in the hands of skilled naval aviators. The Curtiss SB-2C Helldiver replaced the beloved Dauntless despite pilots dubbing it the Beast for its handling difficulties and numerous teething problems. The Vultee A-31 and A-35 Vengeance served primarily with British and Commonwealth forces, seeing limited combat as dive bombing doctrine fell from favour. Japanese carrier aviation relied heavily on the Aichi D-3A Val, with its distinctive fixed landing gear, delivering the opening blows at Pearl Harbor with remarkable accuracy. The faster Yokosuka D-4 Wide Judy offered improved performance, but suffered from Japan's endemic problem of fragile construction and inadequate protection for fuel tanks and crew. The Soviet Union revolutionized ground attack aviation with the Ilyushin Il-2 Sturmovik, the most produced aircraft in history with over 36,000 built. Armoured like a flying tank with an armoured shell protecting the engine and cockpit, the Sturmovik could absorb tremendous punishment while devastating German armoured columns with bombs, rockets, and cannon fire. German troops called it the Black Death, fearing its relentless attacks more than any other aircraft. The improved Ilyushin Il-10 arrived near war's end with even better performance. The earlier Sukhoi Su-2 light bomber proved quickly outclassed and relegated to secondary duties. Perhaps the strangest bomber of the war, the ancient Polikarpov Po-2 biplane operated as a night harassment bomber flown primarily by Soviet female pilots, known as the Night Witches. Its slow wooden and canvas construction allowed it to glide silently over German positions, with engine idled, dropping small bombs that caused more psychological damage than physical destruction, denying exhausted troops any rest. The British Fairey Battle suffered disastrous losses during the Battle of France, with entire squadrons annihilated by German fighters and flak, proving obsolete before the war even began. The Bristol Bow fighter served more effectively as a heavy strike fighter, hammering coastal targets and shipping with its formidable armament. The Arado R-234 Blitz represented a glimpse of the future as the world's first operational jet bomber, using its speed to evade interception during reconnaissance and bombing missions over Allied territory, though it arrived too late to influence the war's outcome. Torpedo bombing demanded extraordinary courage, requiring pilots to fly low and slow toward heavily defended warships while launching their weapons at point-blank range. The Douglas TBD Devastator epitomized this sacrifice at Midway, when 41 torpedo bombers launched against the Japanese fleet and only 6 returned, their obsolete aircraft shot from the sky by Zeros and anti-aircraft fire. Yet their selfless attack pulled Japanese fighters down to wave-top level, leaving the enemy carriers vulnerable to the dauntless dive bombers that followed minutes later. The Grumman TBF Avenger replaced the doomed Devastator, proving far more capable with better speed, protection, and payload capacity. Rugged and reliable, the Avenger served throughout the Pacific Campaign and participated in the legendary Marianas Turkey Shoot, where American naval aviation decimated Japanese carrier forces. The British Fairey Swordfish represented perhaps the most improbable success story of the war. An obsolete fabric-covered biplane, affectionately called the string bag, that somehow remained deadly effective throughout the conflict. Flying from the carrier Ark Royal in May 1941, Swordfish torpedo bombers crippled the German battleship Bismarck with a lucky hit to its rudder, leaving the pride of the Kriegsmarine circling helplessly until British battleships arrived to finish her off. canvas and wood versus steel and firepower. The ancient swordfish prevailed through pilot skill and determination. The ungainly fairy barracuda eventually replaced the beloved stringbag, offering better performance though never capturing the same affection from its crews. The Bristol Beaufort served effectively as both torpedo bomber and maritime patrol aircraft, operating from British and Australian bases. Japanese naval aviation relied on the Nakajima B-5N Kate as its primary torpedo and level bomber, with these aircraft delivering the devastating torpedo attacks at Pearl Harbor that crippled the American Pacific Fleet. The Kate's combination of range, payload, and accuracy made it formidable during the war's opening campaigns. The improved Nakajima B-6N Jill arrived later with better performance and protection, though by then American fighters and anti-aircraft defenses had evolved to counter such threats effectively. France entered the war with a collection of bombers ranging from obsolete to promising. The angular Amiot 143 represented pre-war design thinking already outdated by 1939. The slow block MB 210 medium bomber proved hopelessly outclassed by German fighters during the Battle of France. The Leo 451 stood as France's best bomber design, fast and capable, but arrived in woefully inadequate numbers too late to prevent the nation's collapse. The Breguet 693 ground attack aircraft showed promise, but fell victim to the 1940 disaster. Commonwealth nations contributed significantly to the bomber offensive through license-built versions of British designs. Canadian factories produced thousands of Avro Lancasters and Handley Page Hamptons that served with distinction in bomber command. Australia manufactured Bristol Beauforts for Pacific operations while also producing the CAC Wirraway, a light bomber and trainer design based on the North American design that proved tragically outmatched when pressed into combat as a fighter. From strategic city busters to precision dive bombers, from carrier-based torpedo planes to specialized ground attack aircraft, these machines defined warfare from above throughout the deadliest conflict in human history.